The 2020 US presidential election campaign is about to kick off in earnest. Donald Trump today officially launching his re-election bid. The president will announce he's running for 4 more years. He'll do that at a rally in Orlando, Florida. Current polls show Donald Trump trailing Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden, but there's a long way to go, and the president will be reminding his supporters what the pollsters predicted in 2016.
There's not going to be a President Donald Trump.
Trump will not be president.
Trump will never be elected president of the United States.
You're not going to be president.
A man who will never be president of the United States.
Donald Trump is not going to be president of the United States.
He will never be president.
Donald Trump is not going to become president of the United States.
Well, they were all wrong. That last voice, Senator Bernie Sanders, who's once amongst many high-profile Democrats who did not believe that Donald Trump would be elected president in 2016. Mind you, many Republicans didn't think so either. I'm joined now to discuss Donald Trump's chances of re-election in 2020 by 2 prominent American conservatives with opposing views of the president. In Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Mica Mosbacher. She's a member of the Trump 2020 National Advisory Board. And joining me from California is John Ziegler, host of the Individual One podcast. Mica, John, welcome to RM Breakfast.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning, friend.
Mica, 4 years ago, Donald Trump's mantra to win the election was "Make America Great Again." What will be his message to his supporters today when he launches his re-election bid?
It will be the same, that it was promises made and promises kept. He promised to reinvigorate the economy. We've added 600,000 manufacturing jobs in the last few months alone. He has promised to restore Supreme Court justices who are pro-life to the Supreme Court. He's done so. He's rolled back hundreds of job-killing regulations. We have record unemployment among African Americans and women in this country. We've hit a all-time low. And in addition, people have applauded him, and that's why there are thousands of people who have waited in line in Orlando in the rain to attend this mother of all rallies, which really has been unprecedented. And I believe it is so important to keep the base invigorated so that they're not lulled into a false sense of security, especially since the polling is usually wrong. After all, you just played some clips that showed that many people and many pundits had written off Donald Trump as the candidate in 2016.
Okay.
And he was actually up only 1 in 15 polls.
Okay.
So he'll continue to run against the swamp.
Let me bring in John. John, you're a lifelong Republican. You just heard Mica there. The polls were wrong last time. Donald Trump's convinced they're wrong again at the moment. But given that long list of positive announcements that Mica rolled off, why won't you be supporting Donald Trump in 2020?
Well, because a lot of what you just heard was propaganda.
Well, some of it is fact. I mean, his record unemployment, I think the lowest unemployment in 50 years, isn't it?
Donald Trump has very little of anything to do with that. But let's address the topic here, which is, will Donald Trump win? Mm-hmm. One of the great myths of 2016 is that the polls were somehow catastrophically wrong. The national polls were, at the very end, almost exactly right. Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump by almost 3 million votes in the popular vote. It's just that Donald Trump pulled an amazing, miraculous inside straight by winning 3 states he had no business winning: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 3 states where he is way behind in the polls right now against Joe Biden. If Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee and the election was held tomorrow, Donald Trump would lose with 100% certainty. You know what? The weatherman is often wrong, but that doesn't mean you don't check the weather before you go outside and decide whether or not you're going to put on a jacket or not. The reality is that it was a fluke in 2016, and if Democrats are smart, which I don't know that they will be because I'm a lifelong Republican who doesn't trust Democrats, but if they're smart and Joe Biden is the nominee, Donald Trump needs another miracle in order to win in 2020, and that's just a fact.
Okay, but can I just, before I come back to Mica, can I just ask you why you don't think he deserves another term? Well,
because the number one reason is he's a pathological liar who's psychologically unfit to be president of the United States, and if he is reelected with no accountability, we haven't seen anything yet. In a second term, Donald Trump will be a very dangerous person because he will no longer have to face the voters of the United States of America, and he will be left to his own psychological devices, and his own mental illnesses will take over, as they already have. This reality television show will go off the rails in a second term.
Okay, let me bring in Mica there. Mica, just in relation to the president's form in terms of his decision-making, there's been a lot said, a lot written, and a lot proven about fairly erratic decision-making going on in the White House. Does that concern you?
No, that's fake news.
Fake news.
First of all, America has stopped appeasing its enemies, and individuals have reacted to his strength. The fact that he is willing to take a strong stand with China and impose tariffs on China, impose tariffs on Iran. We had a disastrous agreement with under the Obama administration. He is taking a stand with Iran. They are testing us because we are breaking the back of their economy with sanctions. And secondly, I've been part of 5 presidential campaigns as a fundraiser for the Republican National Committee. I look at money raised, not polling. We have raised a record $40 million in the campaign, mostly small donors. We've raised a record $62 million in the last quarter with the Republican National Committee. The momentum is there for President Trump. He's unorthodox, so there are people in this country who suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. But the truth is that he is delivering on his promises, and he is finally putting America first. And in that opinion, that's my opinion, it's making America great again.
Okay, you're listening to RM Breakfast. It's 23 past 8. Our guest is Mica Mosbacher, a member of the Trump 2020 National Advisory Board, and John Ziegler, conservative commentator and host of the Individual One podcast. Can we go to some of the issues around the Mueller report? Mica, does President Trump owe the American public some kind of explanation as he heads towards his re-election bid on some of the behaviour that came up in the Mueller report, obstruction of justice, for instance?
Well, there were 2 parts of the Mueller report. First of all, the campaign, as well as President Trump, was completely exonerated in regard to any sort of collusion with the Russians. Secondly, Mueller was not able to come to a conclusion in regard to any obstruction of justice. And how can you have obstruct when there was no underlying crime? So first of all, there is no explanation owed. And if the Democrats continue to investigate or impeach, that will be a political disaster. It was under President Clinton. It backfired on the Republicans.
All right.
So I think that we have an attorney general, the IG, Inspector General in this country, who is looking into irregularities in our Department of Justice and our FBI, where some individuals have already been fired. So President Trump, as well as Attorney General Barr, are trying to restore faith in our justice system in this country, which is in shambles.
All right, John Ziegler, that's one slant on the Mueller inquiry and the president's actions around that. Does President Trump, in your view, owe the American public some kind of explanation in terms of, the allegations that he at least welcomed help from a foreign government in election, if not colluded? Do you think that's going to be a factor in him not being re-elected? Do you think it's going to matter at all to the American voting public?
Well, those are 2 very different issues. I mean, the explanation you just heard was worse than propaganda. That's from a cult member right there. That was not an accurate description at all of what Robert Mueller found or what Robert Mueller said.
Hang on, Mica. Let John have a go. Go, you, John.
I've read it, and I doubt you have, and I know the President of the United States has not read it. Here's what happened.
Hang on, Mica. Mica, please, let John finish his answer.
Here's what happened with the Mueller report. There was so much obstruction, Mueller wasn't able to determine for sure whether there was a conspiracy, a legal term, which is incredibly narrow, a conspiracy with Russia. The issue of collusion was never even something that Mueller looked at, yet the President loves to distort using that word. The reality is that the President didn't even do an interview with Robert Mueller, and in written answers said 37 times he couldn't remember key events. That's so much obstruction, along with destruction of evidence, people taking the Fifth Amendment, dangling of pardons, that there's no possible way that Robert Mueller could have found evidence of a conspiracy Congress, even if it existed, because there was so much obstruction. The president should be impeached. Whether or not he will be or not, I do not know. I doubt Democrats will have the guts to do it. It is delusional, by the way, to say that Republicans suffered for impeaching Bill Clinton. They won the next 4 congressional elections in a row, including the presidential election.
Okay, let's lower the temperature a little here because we're almost out of time. Mica, as we look towards this re-election bid from the US president, you said in your first answer, you know, it's important for him to keep the base invigorated. He invigorated the base in his run in the last election by promising to build a wall on the US-Mexico border, for instance, to stop illegal immigration. That hasn't materialised yet. Mexico is not paying for it. What do you think the president is going to offer the base this time around?
Well, first of all, back to Mexico paying for the wall. Mexico is now cooperating by sending thousands of troops to the border. We have a severe crisis across our southern border in the United States, and part of the issue is that the Democrats and Republicans, especially the Democrats, won't come to the table. This has been a long-standing problem for decades, the need for immigration reform. And President Trump
so what I'm asking you, I suppose, how do you think he's
at the border?
But how is he going to present that to his supporters? He didn't achieve that. Do you think he'll just bowl that up again?
No, the fact that he has Mexico cooperating in the conversation to help mitigate the issues at the border is huge, and that base responded to that extremely well.
Okay.
What the Democrats need is a record to run on, and what they have done is obstruct and investigate.
All right, John, just very briefly from you, what do you expect to see from Donald Trump as he, as Mica puts it, attempts to keep the base invigorated?
Well, the problem is that the base is only 41, 42% of the electorate. And in a head-to-head, 2-person race, you cannot win the presidency of the United States with 42%. So that's a problem for Donald Trump. He needs something to happen. He needs either Joe Biden not to be the nominee or he needs a third person to enter the race. Otherwise, he's going to be a one-term president, which would be the best thing for history we could possibly imagine.
What about external events? What about some kind of, you know, if it ended up with some kind of military action against Iran, for instance, something like that?
Oh, certainly there could be events that change things, but the opinions of Donald Trump are so entrenched and so set in stone that it would really take something monumental to upheave the current political climate. That's certainly possible. We live in a very strange world, but as of today, Donald Trump needs something to change for him to be reelected.
Okay, one final question from each of you. Keep your answers relatively short, if I could ask that. Mica, starting with you. In 2016, Donald Trump beat 16 fellow Republicans. He then beat Hillary Clinton to become the first person to reach the Oval Office with no political or military experience. Has Donald Trump forever changed the presidency, in your view?
Has he? Yes, because he is taking on the swamp in Washington, D.C., the entrenched deep state or bureaucrats. And I went out on a limb in 2016 and predicted that Donald Trump would win and would prevail when no one else had taken him seriously, and I predict he'll prevail again.
And John Ziegler, let me ask you the same question. Has Donald Trump changed the presidency? And perhaps importantly, has the presidency changed him at all, in your view?
I don't know if it's changed him, but he has changed the presidency. It is much more of a monarchy now. He thinks of himself as a king. He has degraded the office in numerous ways. He has not drained the swamp. He is the swamp. And I fear that if he gets a second term, we're headed down a path from which there is no return. All
right. John Ziegler, Mica Mosbacher, thank you very much for joining us. Donald Trump kicks off his re-election campaign for 2020 with a Make America Great campaign again today in Orlando, Florida. And it's a long way to the White House from here, but we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran.
Mica Mosbacher is a member of the Trump 2020 National Advisory Board and widow of the former U.S. Secretary of Commerce Robert Mosbacher. And John Ziegler is a conservative commentator and host of the Individual One podcast. And later today, Donald Trump will front that rally. Mica told us that there's already thousands and thousands of people lining up in Orlando in the rain, desperate to see Donald Trump kick off his re-election bid.